Title: The Mystery of Alexander Blackwood's Room. As the sun began to set, the sprawling estate of the wealthy businessman, Alexander Blackwood, came into view. The estate was vast, with manicured gardens, a large swimming pool, and a tennis court. The estate had a reputation for being one of the most opulent in the country, and Alexander Blackwood was known to throw the most lavish parties, attended by the crème de la crème of society. On this particular evening, Alexander Blackwood had invited his closest friends and family to a party at his estate. The guests arrived in their finest attire and were greeted by butlers in immaculate suits, offering them champagne and canapés. The party was in full swing, with music playing, guests chatting, and laughter filling the air. As the night wore on, the guests began to disperse, leaving only a handful of people behind. It was then that Alexander Blackwood called everyone into the drawing room, where he announced that he had a surprise for them. He led them to a large door at the end of the room, which he unlocked with a flourish. The room beyond was dark, with only a single lamp illuminating the space. The guests were intrigued, and Alexander Blackwood beckoned them inside, promising that what they were about to see would be unlike anything they had ever experienced. As the guests entered the room, the door slammed shut behind them, and they heard a distinct click as it locked. Panic set in as they realized that they were trapped, with no way out. Alexander Blackwood, who had been standing by the door, turned to face them, a smug expression on his face. He informed them that he had designed the room to be an escape challenge, with the objective being to find a way out before the time limit was up. The guests were incredulous and demanded to be let out, but Alexander Blackwood simply laughed and left them to their fate. The room was a maze of puzzles and clues, and the guests quickly set to work, trying to find a way out. They searched the room for hidden objects and examined the furniture for any clues, but nothing seemed to yield any answers. As time ticked by, the tension in the room began to rise, and the guests started to turn on each other. Accusations were thrown around, and suspicions ran high. They searched each other's pockets for any clues, but found nothing. As the hours wore on, the guests began to tire and lose hope. Some started to panic, while others grew despondent, resigned to their fate. The room was completely soundproof, and they had no way of calling for help. As they searched for a way out, the guests began to realize that the clues and puzzles were designed to test their relationships with each other. They started to work together, sharing ideas and collaborating on solutions. Slowly but surely, they began to make progress. It was then that one of the guests noticed something strange about the lamp in the room. Upon closer inspection, they discovered a hidden compartment containing a key. The guests quickly realized that the key was the way out of the room, and they set to work trying to find the lock it opened. As they searched for the lock that the key opened, the guests noticed a strange symbol etched into the wall. They couldn't make out what it meant or what its purpose was, but they had a feeling that it was important. As they continued to search the room, they heard a strange noise coming from behind one of the walls. They pressed their ears to the wall and heard what sounded like someone whispering. The guests were startled and began to feel a sense of unease. They couldn't understand what the voice was saying, but they could tell that it was urgent. They searched the wall for any signs of an opening or a hidden compartment, but they found nothing. Just then, the lamp in the room flickered, and the guests heard a loud noise coming from the door. They rushed over to investigate and found that the door was shaking violently. They tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the shaking stopped, and the door was silent once again. The guests were now more confused than ever and started to wonder if they were hallucinating or if the room was haunted. As they continued to search for the lock that the key opened, they found a small safe hidden behind a painting on the wall. The key fit perfectly, and they opened the safe to find a note inside. The note read, "You have 1 hour left. Find the way out before it's too late." The guests were now in a state of panic, realizing that time was running out. They searched the room frantically, trying to find any clue or solution that would lead them out of the room. Just as they were about to give up hope, one of the guests noticed a small button on the lamp. They pressed it, and the wall behind them slid open, revealing a secret passage. The guests rushed through the passage and found themselves outside the room, free at last. As they looked back at the room, they couldn't help but wonder what the purpose of the challenge was and why Alexander Blackwood had put them through it. The mystery of the room and the strange occurrences inside it would stay with them for a long time, leaving them with more questions than answers. The guests were puzzled by the note, unsure of what it meant. They searched the room once again, hoping to find a clue that would shed some light on the mysterious message. As they combed through every inch of the room, one of the guests noticed something strange about the wallpaper. Upon closer inspection, they discovered that there was a small tear in the wallpaper, revealing a hidden compartment behind it. Inside the compartment was a book, and as they opened it, they realized that it was a journal belonging to Alexander Blackwood himself. The guests eagerly read through the journal, hoping to find some answers. The entries were cryptic and filled with riddles, but they soon realized that the journal held the key to solving the mystery of the room. As they pored over the journal, they pieced together the clues and finally uncovered the location of the lock that the key opened. With trembling hands, they inserted the key into the lock and turned it. There was a loud click, and the door slowly swung open. The guests rushed out of the room, relieved to be free at last. As they made their way back to the party, they realized that something was not quite right. There was a tension in the air, and they could feel eyes watching them from the shadows. Suddenly, there was a loud scream, and one of the guests fell to the ground, clutching their throat. They had been poisoned, and as the guests looked around, they realized that they had been set up. The escape room had been a distraction, a ploy to keep them in one place while their host exacted his revenge. The guests frantically searched for an antidote, but it was too late. One by one, they succumbed to the poison, and their bodies were found scattered throughout the estate the next morning. The police were called, but Alexander Blackwood was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The guests' families demanded justice, but the case was never solved. To this day, the mystery of the escape room and the deadly game that followed remains unsolved.